What's going on, you guys? My name's Ty Knots and welcome to Top 5 Unknowns, 5 psych ward stories from Reddit. Number 5. I was a pharmacy technician at a hospital with a psych ward for some time. We'd have to go around with a cart and dispense the patient's medications, and being a 5'2" girl, a security guard or male nurse would accompany me, just as a precaution. I never had any real issues other than the occasional death grip onto my arm or manic outburst, but there was one boy who was entirely different. His chart said that he was 9 and he had pale skin, dark hair, and huge bright green eyes. He always greeted me in the most polite way, and he asked how I was doing. He always found something different to compliment me on every single day. He was extremely well-spoken and mature for his age, so I began looking forward to seeing him, as normally small talk is definitely something I cherished in that setting. If he saw me outside of his room in the halls, he made sure to say hello and always called me Miss Jones or ma'am. Well, one day, a couple of our female nurses saw me pause to chat with them in the hallway and waved me over to ask if I was out of my mind. Apparently, when he was in kindergarten, he grew an intense attachment to his young female teacher. This escalated to the point of him calling her mom and leaving notes for her about how he wished he were her son. He had a normal home life with both parents, and the teacher tried to explain that she couldn't be his mom because that would hurt his real mother's feelings, and that she already had that job covered. So he went home and killed his mother in her sleep by cutting her throat so his teacher could be his mom. The female staff apparently had a general rule of not interacting with them excessively to prevent any sort of attachment from forming. So don't judge a book by its cover, I guess. Number 4. When I first started working in the hospital, I was sitting with this sweet little old woman. I'd sat with her talking about her family and such for about 6 hours. Towards the end of my shift at 9 p.m., they decided she didn't need to have a heart monitor, so they transferred her to a different unit. Once we got to the new room, she started acting differently. Just generally angry, I would say. Then all of a sudden, she tried to jump out of bed, so I immediately got up to stop her. She started screaming bloody murder and how her house was on fire, and her family was inside and she needed to get them out. I tried to calm her down, but to no avail. She started yelling at me about how I'm going to rot in the flames of hell because God told her so, and how I was responsible for her family's death. Staring deep into my eyes, she told me all about how I'll burn in eternal flames and that I'm filled with evil. So I thought at least she isn't worried about her family or worried about trying to get out of bed. But then she started screaming at the top of her lungs in what I can only describe as Latin or maybe even just gibberish. She then ripped out her dentures, threw them at me, and pulled all of the skin on her face into this stretched out creepy smile. She then let out a blood-curdling scream with her eyes rolled back in her head like some sort of possession scene in a movie. Just as she let up, my relief came into the room. I wished her luck and booked it out of there. The second I got out of the unit, I called my mom and cried for a good 15 minutes. I still think of her stretched out face sometimes. Number 3. After I attempted to kill myself earlier this year, they told me they were going to detain me for at least 3 days, and if I resisted, they were going to call the police. The thing is, the hospital in the city was so full that they sent me 2 hours out into the middle of nowhere. There were about 12 of us on the floor, and it was pretty apparent that everyone else had many deeper problems than my depression. Still, most of them were nice, and I spent my time on my bed reading. On my second night there, I heard screaming in the halls. The doors had no lock, so another girl, probably about my age, kicked my door open and stood in the doorway, staring at me with wide eyes and a knife in her hand. I sat there frozen for a few seconds before she was tackled by 2 security guards. A nurse came in and told me not to worry, but she was in a rush. They had everything under control and told me to just stay in the room. They then locked her in one of the quiet rooms, a padded cell with a circular window which was right across the hall from me, where she spent the rest of the night kicking at the door and yelling threats like "I'll slit your throat." The next day, the psychiatrist finally came to talk to me and asked if I was going to kill myself again. I told them no and that I was good, and they sent me home. All in all, my time there did much more harm than good. Number 2. This one night, I remember falling asleep rather fast and waking up in the middle of the night to someone singing. It started off faintly, then got louder as the person neared my room. I then realized that someone was pacing the hall singing. It got much creepier. While he was singing, he was running his nails down the walls as he paced back and forth, continuing to sing. What made it even worse is that he was singing about death and demons, which was totally freaking me out. I remember my exact thoughts were, I'm gonna die. It was like a scene from some sort of horror movie and went on for a good 20 minutes, and I couldn't figure out why the nurses weren't doing their checks and why this kid was still pacing without being found. I was starting to get more and more nervous by the second when all of a sudden I hear across from the room one of the girls with extreme anger management problems start yelling for the kid to shut up. I was relieved that I wasn't the only one hearing this, and a second later I heard a loud bang from across the hall. The girl had somehow flung open her locked door and tackled the kid to the ground. She was angry as he was disrupting her sleep, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. After a couple seconds of listening to them wrestle on the floor, I finally heard the nurses come running to break it up. Supposedly they'd both gone to the kitchen to get coffee or something, but I'm still not completely sure where they were during all of this. I suppose this story was more on the funnier side, but at the time it really freaked me out. Number 1. I was in a psych ward once for about 2 weeks after threatening suicide. There was a girl and she was in her early 20s, and I was curious about why she was on the children's floor. Apparently the girl was seriously messed up in the head and she'd been there since she was 10. Her parents were either rich or had great insurance because she was there 24/7 for over 10 years. She would flip out on the night of new arrivals. This continued for a few days until another new girl arrived, and then she started screaming at her instead. Anyway, this girl was huge, maybe 5'10" and at least 200 pounds. The floor was getting ready for visitation, and all of a sudden she came charging out of her room, down the hall to the common room, and started flipping tables, tore the TV off the wall, punched 2 orderlies, and broke a few other things until one of the nurses came and chased her down and gave her a triple dose of Thorazine. She tried to fight it, and it was like a slow-motion tiger. Eventually, they called up 3 burly security guards who basically dragged her to the quiet room. About an hour later, we watched them drag her back to her room and strap her down to the bed. After that, she slept for almost 2 days straight. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos.